compelling narrative of polar exploration is, I feel, one of the great stories of our era. I'm Bradley Peabody, and as I've covered these stories for the New York Times for a number of years, I've been asked to say a few words before we meet with one of these great explorers, Sir Ernest Shackleton of Great Britain. Let me begin with some history of polar exploration and its legacy. Before Shackleton, there was another great polar explorer named Robert Falcon Scott. When Captain Scott first announced his ill-fated 1910 Terra Nova expedition to the South Pole, over 6,000 men volunteered to join him. These men were attracted by the eternal values of leadership, bravery, integrity, and a sense of curiosity and wonder. Scott and Shackleton were and are very different men in their temperament, their training, and their approach. Captain Scott of the Royal Navy was under strict orders from the Navy and Royal Geographical Society. Shackleton, with a merchant marine background, had independent financing and more leeway in his decision-making. Interestingly, when Captain Scott first went south on the Discovery Expedition in 1901, on board with him was a young crewman named Ernest Shackleton, who no doubt learned much under his command. In my mind, both of these men, Scott and Shackleton, should be remembered as great leaders, explorers, and heroes. Let me share with you a few words from Captain Scott himself in his 1905 book, The Voyage of the Discovery. Before us lay the unknown. What fascination lies in the word? Could anyone wonder that we determined to push on? We're here today to acknowledge Sir Ernest's extraordinary capacity to push on at this press conference. And here to introduce him, may I present his shipmate, Timothy McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Peabody. He has been called the most inspiring leader of men God ever chose to place upon this earth. Yet he never led a team larger than 27. He failed to accomplish any of the major goals he ever set for himself, and in the process lost thousands upon thousands of pounds of equipment, supply, provision. Still, when you consider the 1914 Antarctic expedition led by Sir Ernest Shackleton, the facts shout out two undeniable truths. He may have failed at the improbable, yes, but what he succeeded at was the unimaginable. Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. As Mr. Peabody has told you, I am Timothy McCarthy, late of the Royal Navy, eldest member of His Majesty's Discovery ship Endurance, and proud participant in the Imperial Transantarctic Expedition under the command of Sir Ernest Shackleton. Sir Ernest is very much looking forward to this afternoon's press conference here in America, and wishes to acknowledge with gratitude not only the hospitality of the Washburn Crosby Milling Company, but also the participation of so many celebrated journalists from around the globe. Today, we shall celebrate together the 5th anniversary of one of the most incredible adventures known to the history of man. Homer's Odyssey, Arthur's quest for the Holy Grail, these are but fictional examples of man's quest to lead a defining journey through life. The man you shall meet this morning has lived that kind of bold adventure, but in the utmost non-fictional way. He has graciously agreed to reflect upon all aspects of that journey which, quite simply, defined the word leadership for a crew of 27 men. However, Sir Ernest has respectfully requested that you limit your enquiries to the expedition itself. He does not wish to discuss the circumstances and events of March 30th, 1912, when his good friend, colleague, and fellow explorer, Captain Robert Scott, lost his life whilst returning from the South Pole. Sir Ernest was quite unable to speak or to write about it then, and he respectfully requests that we not speak about it now. So, if we can agree on that point, why then we may proceed. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I felt certain I could rely upon your sense of professionalism and your courtesy. And since we are in agreement, it now gives me great pleasure to bring to the stage the man who is quite simply responsible for the fact that I am yet alive today. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, I give you Sir Ernest Henry Shackleton.
A ship specifically built, rigged, fitted, staffed, and named for what was to be the greatest single journey that any ship would never make. She was also responsible for the events of the 28th day of February in the year 1914, when King George V of England appropriated the sum of £5,000 to a small group of sailors and scientists that was known quite elegantly as the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. Our intended mission, however, not quite so elegant. We were to cross the Antarctic continent on foot, all the while charting and documenting environmental conditions, vegetation, wildlife and their migration patterns, the geographic and magnetic South Pole, and the effect of tidal shifts in both the Weddell and Ross Seas. I was privileged to be the leader of that expedition, of that brilliant and remarkable collection of men and dogs. We spent over a year's time preparing our materials, preparing our ship, and preparing ourselves for the expedition. We studied botany, zoology, celestial navigation, ice flow patterns, frostbite treatment, and general medicine. We created new methods of storing and preserving vegetables, meats, and other rations by combining methodologies of freezing, drying, and vacuum sealing. We discarded the bulky and cumbersome fur coats, boots, and gloves in favor of a lighter and warmer material manufactured at our request by Burberry of London. We created dome-shaped tents. We created motorized sledges. In fact, we prepared for anything and everything that the Antarctic continent could hurl into our path. And she chose to do precisely that. Finally, on the 14th day of August in the year 1914, we set sail from the southern banks of the Thames, just as England was declaring war upon Germany. Though every single man volunteered to stay back and fight, we received word from His Majesty, through the First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, that we were to, quote, proceed, unquote. And so, with that single word from His Majesty, our own white warfare began. By the 15th day of January in the year 1915, the Endurance had fought her way valiantly through treacherous ice floes in the Weddell Sea to within 60 miles of our destination, Boswell Bay and the Antarctic continent. However, by the 18th day of January, the ship Endurance was beset in the most impenetrable, immovable, and damnable pack ice that I have ever encountered. Only 60 miles from our destination. 60 miles of utter impossibility. 60 miles of certain death, whether we attempt to cross it by foot, by boat, or by sledge. Only 60 miles from our destination. The ship Endurance was crushed by the pack ice of the Weddell Sea on the 25th day of October in the year 1915. We decided to head for home. But heading for home meant 11 months of the most punishing and unforgiving conditions imaginable. We suffered through the inky black of 2 polar winters. We subsisted on meat provided by seal, by penguin, and occasionally dog. We suffered with exposure, frostbite, hunger, thirst, dysentery, pneumonia, even heart attack. But never pessimism. Never pessimism. Through our individual and collective commitments to push on, we succeeded in finally reaching that same south bank of the Thames on the 23rd day of September in the year 1916, though by that time, most people had given us up for dead. And in fact, there's at least one journalist in this room who was kind enough to write my obituary sometime before the fact. Isn't that right, Mr. Peabody? You see if I can recall how you put it in your very esteemed periodical. Oh yes. I believe you referred to me as a hapless sailor on a hopeless quest. Well, Mr. Peabody, I'm going to give you the opportunity to retract that statement here today based on 2 very certifiable facts. 1, Ernest Henry Shackleton is obviously still very much alive, and 2, we sailors really have no idea what the word hapless actually means. So if you'll be kind enough with both a retraction and a definition, sir, I will return the favor in kind and permit you the very first question of this interview process today. Do we have a bargain, sir?